Today, we are strapping ourselves in for an extraordinary journey,
Hmm.
the genesis of a company whose logo you probably see 5 times before you even have lunch.
Oh, easily.
We're zooming way back in time, all the way to 1962, to look at the birth of what would become Nike, and we're doing it entirely through the eyes of its founder, Phil Knight.
And this is all from his memoir, Shoe Dog, which is just, it's so brutally honest.
It really is.
It's easy, decades later to look at Nike and just assume there was this grand corporate blueprint or some heavily financed master plan.
Right, like it was inevitable.
Exactly. But what the source material shows is, well, it's a classic entrepreneurial origin story. It's defined by absolute chaos, profound financial stress, and just sheer blind audacity.
So for the next 30 minutes or so, we're not looking at a blueprint.
No, we're looking at a barely legible scribble that somehow managed to survive its own creation.
That's a perfect way to put it. Our mission today is to intensely unpack the very first, very unpredictable steps of Blue Ribbon Sports, that was the original company, during that critical 5-year stretch from 1962 to 1967.
This is the period when Phil Knight, this shy, financially strapped Oregonian with what he called his crazy idea, goes from pure existential angst to becoming a full-blown entrepreneur.
And we need to track the critical, life-altering relationships he formed, the almost fatal international negotiations he survived, and maybe most importantly, the downright brutal financial reality of trying to launch a global brand with basically zero capital.
Yeah, the story is built on grit, desperation, and, as we're definitely going to see, a few crucial white lies.
A few very big ones.
It's so fitting that he opens his memoir with a quote from the Zen master Shunryu Suzuki. In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are a few.
And that's Knight to a T.
It is. What's fascinating here is that his early success was defined less by inherent business skill and more by his beginner's capacity for risk, plus an almost necessary lack of pessimism. He just didn't know enough about how a shoe company should fail.
Which is exactly what allowed him to keep moving forward.
Right, despite every logical warning sign telling him to stop.
And our deep dive starts right there, in 1962, a foggy morning in Oregon. Knight is 24, he's just back from Stanford Business School and a stint in the Army. He's out for a run, but he feels like the same shy, pale, rail-thin kid he'd always been.
And he's wrestling with that big universal question. What is my purpose? What am I supposed to do?
He realizes he doesn't want to get stuck in a traditional job. He doesn't want that respectability his father was always talking about.
He wants his work to feel like play, something, meaningful, purposeful, creative, and important.
But his true driver, and this is such a subtle but profound insight in the book, it wasn't really the positive goal of winning.
No, not at all. He writes, and this is key, that he simply didn't want to lose.
That distinction is just incredibly telling, isn't it? The fear of failure being stronger than the thrill of victory.
It absolutely is. It speaks to the underdog mentality that defined that whole early operation. It wasn't about this grand world-conquering ambition, not yet. It was about survival. It was about avoiding the soul-crushing alternative of a boring, safe, corporate life.
He decides life is a game, and if you refuse to play, you just get left on the sidelines.
Yeah, so he had to chase that prodigious, improbable dream with an athlete's focus. And he describes it so vividly, running faster and faster. And that crazy idea starts shining up ahead, convincing him, by God, I'll make it work.
Okay, so let's unpack this crazy idea. Because its origins aren't, romantic or rugged. They're academic.
Right, this comes straight from his entrepreneurship seminar at Stanford.
A class paper.
Exactly. The premise was elegant, really, and just purely observational. Knight had been tracking what was happening in global markets. He saw that Japanese manufacturers like Nikon and Canon had completely undercut the German camera market, which had been dominant for decades.
And they did it by offering really high quality at a much more aggressive price point.
Right. And his core argument was just a simple transposition. Japanese running shoes could do the exact same thing to the reigning German giants,
Specifically, Adidas and Puma.
who at that time just owned the global market, especially in the U.S. It was a thesis based entirely on economic arbitrage and logistics.
And how did his classmates react?
They were, as he puts it, formally bored. Not one single person asked a question.
Ouch.
But the professor, he saw the solid economic argument behind it. He gave him an A.
And that A was really all the validation he needed, wasn't it? It was like his permission slip to go do this crazy thing.
It was. And the idea immediately transformed into a plan for action.
Yeah.
Knight decides he needs to take this grand 9-month backpacking trip around the world.
Not just for sightseeing, though.
No, it had a critical, focused detour. Go to Japan and pitch this thesis directly to a shoe manufacturer. He sort of frames the trip as this big existential journey, too. He wanted to find what the Chinese call Tao, or the Greeks call Logos.
A capital C connection with the world.
Right. But before he could find enlightenment, he had to figure out the financing for this quasi-spiritual, quasi-business voyage.
And the logistics in 1962 were no joke. He had about $1,500 saved up from the Army and some summer jobs.
But then he had to sell his most prized possession.
The cherry black 1960 MG.
With racing tires. The same model Elvis drove in Blue Hawaii. That just shows you the level of commitment, or maybe naivete, to sacrifice his freedom machine for an idea.
A huge sacrifice. But even after selling the car, he was still $1,000 short.
So he has to go pitch this whole vague, wildly expensive plan to his father, Bill Knight, the formidable publisher of the Oregon Journal.
Yeah, and he fully expected a hard no. His dad was obsessed with respectability. And global air travel in 1962 was not only expensive, it was genuinely dangerous. It was not a practical thing to ask for.
But his dad surprised him completely. He approved the trip and the cash without a fight. Knight realized later that his father, who rarely traveled, deeply regretted not having that adventure in his own youth. He saw it as the finishing touch to his son's education.
Wow. So he gets the blessing, financial and emotional.
Yeah, he doesn't go alone at first. His Stanford classmate, Carter, joins him. When Knight lays out this insane itinerary, Hawaii, Tokyo, Hong Kong, Kathmandu, Rome, London.
Carter's response is just perfect.
Swell idea, Buck. That's it.
So off they go. But before they even get to Asia, there's this crucial layover in Hawaii.
And this turns out to be his first really painful lesson in sales and rejection. They're burning through money way too fast, so they take jobs selling encyclopedias door to door.
And Knight was
Terrible at it.
Yeah.
Utterly miserable. He realized his deep shyness made strangers intensely uncomfortable. He says he is not built for heavy doses of rejection.
He traced it all the way back to being cut from his freshman baseball team.
Yeah, the rejection of the product felt like a rejection of him, so he had to pivot fast. He sees a want ad, wanted, security salesman.
And with his brand new MBA, he gets a job at Investors Overseas Services, a notorious firm.
Oh yeah, a boiler room run by the infamous Bernard Kornfeld. But this is a crucial pivot. Selling investment funds was totally different from encyclopedias. He wasn't a smooth talker, but he knew numbers. He could speak the truth.
He could hide behind the authority of his Stanford degree.
And the certainty of math. He ends up selling Dreyfus funds and earns 6 months' worth of rent in a single week.
That's a staggering turnaround, and we have to remember the backdrop here, late 1962.
The Cuban Missile Crisis. He vividly recalls sitting in dive bars in Hawaii, just convinced the world was about to end in a nuclear flash.
A sense of carpe diem.
Absolutely. He's thinking Hawaii is a pretty good place to watch civilization dissolve. It just amplified his decision to abandon the sales job and press on with his original ridiculous plan.
What's the worst that could happen, right?
Exactly. So he says goodbye to Carter, who stays behind for a girl, of course, and gets on a plane to Tokyo on Thanksgiving Day.
And the flight itself is just steeped in the history and the anxiety of where he's going.
He's literally sweating on the plane, looking at the red circle on the wing, remembering his grandmother warning him the Japs would gouge at his eyeballs.
But the reality on the ground was much more solemn.
Far more. Driving through Tokyo, he saw these vast sections of just liquid black. The damage from the American firebombings in 1944 was still horribly visible. It was a profound lesson.
He gets advice from some ex-GIs on how to do business there, and the main lesson is
avoid the typical asshole American hard sell. He was warned about the Japanese culture of indirection where yes and no can sound the same.
So he's walking into a fun house with trick mirrors, as he puts it.
And despite all the prep, the meeting at Onitsuka in Kobe is a near disaster. He's late, he's in his ill-fitting Brooks Brothers suit, and when they ask who he represents, his adrenaline just surges.
And he blurts it out, Blue Ribbon Sports of Portland, Oregon.
A completely non-existent company he named after his high school track ribbons.
Total improvisation.
But he sticks to his Stanford script. He pitches the huge, untapped American market, the potential to undercut Adidas. And the executives, they're impressed, especially by his audacious claim of $1 billion potential market.
So they ask Blue Ribbon Sports to represent their Tiger brand.
And Knight, with zero money, asks for samples of 3 models, the Limber Up, the Spring Up, and the unfortunately named throw-up,
Right. And he sends them a money order for $50.
which he then immediately has to write to his father to wire him the $50 to cover. It's just the perfect summary of the desperation of that moment.
Okay, so Knight is back home. His mom says he's more worldly. But the actual business, the shoes, they still haven't arrived. This is 4 months after the meeting.
And he knows he can't survive on an imaginary company. He needs to build a solid floor under his earnings.
Which is where the accountant comes in.
Exactly. He takes advice from a friend of his father's, Don Frisbee, the CEO of Pacific Power and Light, and gets his CPA license. He takes a job at Price Waterhouse.
That provided the stability and, I guess, the credibility he needed.
For sure. It bought him time and gave him a professional facade, which was crucial for dealing with his father's bank later on. But he hated it. He wrote to his friend Carter, "I'm an accountant now and giving some thought to blowing my brains out."
Wow.
But then, the first week of 1964, a full year after the pitch, the shoes finally arrive.
He picks them up from a waterfront warehouse. Creamy white shoes with bold blue stripes. He says they were so beautiful he wanted to put them on marble pedestals.
And the very first thing he does is send 2 pairs to the one man whose approval he truly craved.
His old University of Oregon track coach, Bill Bowerman.
A legend, not just a coach, but a master motivator, a professor of competitive responses. But his most relevant obsession was footwear.
He was constantly tinkering with his runner shoes.
Oh yeah, using things like kangaroo skin, even pieces of cod, all in this relentless quest for lightness and efficiency.
And this detail is so foundational to the whole Nike story. Bowerman's core engineering principle based on hard math. 1 ounce sliced off a pair of shoes is equivalent to 55 pounds over 1 mile.
Let's just break that down because it's brilliant. An average runner takes about 880 steps in a mile. So if you remove just 1 ounce from the shoe, you multiply that by 880 steps.
And you save the runner from lifting an extra 55 pounds over that mile.
That microscopic focus on efficiency and biomechanics, that's what made Bowerman an absolutely invaluable partner.
And Bowerman was immediately hooked by the Tiger shoes. They meet for lunch on January 25, 1964.
Knight, still shy, can barely order. Bowerman gets a hamburger, so Knight just croaks out, "Make it 2."
And the coach doesn't just want to buy shoes.
No, he wants in on the deal. They negotiate the initial investment right there. They agree to split the first $1,000 order 50-50.
And then, in a moment of financial parity, they split the check for the 2 hamburgers 50-50 as well.
And where did Bowerman get his $500?
From Mrs. Bowerman's Christmas Club account.
That's the real initial capital of Blue Ribbon Sports, a Christmas savings account.
The legal structure gets set up quickly. Bowerman's lawyer suggests a 51-49 split to make sure Knight, the guy with no money, keeps operating control.
And Knight accepts. It's important to see the contrast in their motivations, too. Knight's father chased respectability. Bowerman, a decorated war hero, grandson of Oregon Trail pioneers. He didn't care about that stuff.
For him, track was about preparing young men for life's struggles. The shoe business was just another lab for that.
Right. So with Bowerman's investment, Knight goes straight to the bank. He gets another $1,000 loan, backed solely by his father's good name.
And he finally quits the accounting job.
Buys a Plymouth Valiant, he calls it Vomit Green, and starts selling shoes out of the trunk at track meets all over the Pacific Northwest.
And this is where that sales failure in Hawaii gets completely redeemed.
Totally. He realized selling Tigers wasn't selling in the traditional sense. It was about sharing a belief. He writes, "I believed in running. I believed these shoes were better. People, sensing my belief, wanted some of that belief for themselves. Belief is irresistible."
That is just a profound concept. He's not selling a product, he's selling an identity, a shared passion.
Exactly. And it worked. He's speaking to runners in their own language, stride, weight, competitive response. And an organic mail order business just springs up. People are phoning and writing, begging for these shoes they saw at a meet.
He even makes a handout advertising low Japanese labor costs and directly challenging European track shoe domination.
And the demand proves the model. The first shipment sells out completely by July 4th, 1964. Blue Ribbon Sports is now real.
So he immediately places a $3,000 order.
A huge leap, 3 times the size of the first one. And again, it has to be financed purely on the promise of future sales, using his dad's reputation as collateral because no bank would touch the risk. So that initial success, of course, immediately attracts the company's first major existential threat,
The one that could have killed BRS before its first birthday.
the infamous Marlboro Man threat.
This comes in late 1964. It's a formal, dreadful letter from a high school wrestling coach on Long Island.
And this coach claims he just got back from Japan, where Onitsuka anointed him as the exclusive American distributor.
And he demands Blue Ribbon stop poaching his territory immediately.
The contrast is it's almost too perfect for fiction. Knight's cousin investigates and discovers this coach isn't just a coach. He was literally one of the original Marlboro men.
The rugged, mythic American cowboy archetype.
And he's confronting this shy, broke Oregonian in a vomit green valiant. It's symbolic, the American dream versus the gritty reality of a startup.
And the terror deepens because Knight writes these frantic letters to Onitsuka for clarification, and he gets
Nanimo. Nothing. Complete silence. And that uncertainty was my whole company built on a handshake that's now been retracted. It sends Knight into a deep personal funk. It even leads to the end of his relationship with his girlfriend, Sarah.
Wow.
So by 1966, the situation is so paralyzing he has no choice. He has to go back to Japan and confront them.
And his father, Bill Knight, grudgingly approves the airfare.
Yeah, and gives him this deep emotional motivator. He says he doesn't understand the business, but he hates someone mistreating his son.
So Knight knows he absolutely cannot lose this negotiation. He prepares like crazy, reading how to do business with the Japanese.
He even dresses up in what he thinks is power attire.
Yeah.
A charcoal gray suit and a black bowler hat. He admits it probably just made him look mad.
He's relying on his runner's mindset, right?
Heavily. He has to forget the hurt, the pain, the debt. He says the art of competing is the art of forgetting. Forgetting your limits, forgetting you've been slighted.
So the meeting in Kobe is just steeped in drama. His original contact is gone. The new manager meets him in a revolving restaurant at a hotel.
A classic bad sign, like they're ushering him out gracefully. But Knight, he's desperate. He launches into this impassioned pitch, citing his growing sales, the cachet of having Bill Bowerman as a partner.
And then comes the pivotal moment.
The unannounced appearance of Mr. Onitsuka himself, the founder. Knight calls him the shogun of shoes.
He says the man's presence filled the room with fear and authority.
And Onitsuka tells him his long-term vision. Everyone in the world wear athletic shoes all the time. He says Knight reminds him of his younger self.
And that's the bridge that secures the deal.
It is. The victory is partial, but it's crucial. Onitsuka grants Blue Ribbon exclusive rights to the track shoe line in the 13 western states. The Marble Man gets wrestling shoes nationwide, but only track shoes on the East Coast.
Knight celebrates by climbing Mount Fuji, a symbolic climb out of the profane to the sacred.
But the fight isn't over. Later that same year, 1966, he flies back for an even more crucial negotiation, full national distribution rights.
He's meeting with a new, younger export manager, Kitami, who seems unsure of himself.
Yeah, Knight senses weakness, like this guy is susceptible to persuasion. Kitami tells them they need a larger, more established firm with official East Coast offices to handle the full U.S. market.
And this is where Knight makes his decisive, company-defining, and potentially company-destroying move.
He drops the most audacious lie he'd ever told. He looks Kitami right in the eye and says, with total conviction, Blue Ribbon does have offices on the East Coast.
Wow, just invents reality. And what's the immediate consequence of that lie?
Kitami, maybe just relieved to have a solution, immediately grants him a 3-year exclusive distribution contract for the entire U.S.
It's a huge victory.
But it comes with a terrifying caveat.
Yep.
An order for 5,000 shoes costing $20,000 that Knight can't possibly pay for, and the requirement is explicit. He has to open that non-existent East Coast office before the shipment arrives.
So he's created a future he's now desperately forced to run into, headfirst, with a massive new debt load, all built on a fabrication.
That's the runner's mentality again. He saw the finish line, national distribution, and decided any action to get there was valid. The lie wasn't malicious, it was just transactional desperation. But it created a massive, immediate problem.
That huge order meant he had to hire his first full-time employee. In 1965, he brings on Jeff Johnson.
Johnson was a total eccentric. A Stanford miler studying anthropology, working as a social worker. Knight offers him a commission, $1.75 per pair.
And Johnson immediately proves to be this overwhelming, tireless, manic force of nature.
Oh yeah, Knight talks about a literal waterfall of correspondence. Johnson's letters would pour in almost daily 2, then 4, then 8 pages long.
Unhinged, he calls them.
Filled with parables, jokes, illustrations, poems, all while detailing sales and driving. Knight and his sister Jean, who was acting as a secretary, to absolute distraction.
Knight said he'd get writer's block just looking at the pile of mail.
Johnson's philosophy explains the intensity, though. He failed miserably at social work. He said his turning point was asking a suicidal client if she was really going to kill herself that day, just so he could save gas money.
Oh my God.
For him, runners were God's chosen, and running was a mystical exercise. He had found his true calling.
But the financial reality was still brutal. Knight kept warning him, Blue Ribbon is sinking like the Titanic. They owed $11,000 to the bank, even before that new $20,000 order.
But Johnson still begged to work full-time. Knight finally agreed, figuring misery loves company. And the reality of it was absurd. Johnson wrote to Knight explaining he wouldn't be filing taxes because his gross income was $1,209, but his total expenses were $1,245.
He was literally running his life at a loss.
And then his dedication was proven, tragically, in 1966. He's nearly killed in a car. Wreck shatters his skull, foot, collarbone. But he keeps filling orders from his apartment, using this near-death experience to justify his urgent focus on Blue Ribbon.
It's this relentless pace that was their survival strategy.
It reinforced Knight's internal mantra during this period: fail fast. He told Johnson, if Blue Ribbon failed, he hoped it would fail quickly so I'd have enough time to implement all the hard-won lessons in the next venture.
The willingness to embrace rapid failure was a key intangible asset.
And that brings us to the constant financial tightrope walk, which is the central drama of this whole period.
The company was always on the edge of collapse.
Always.
Yeah.
Especially with the bank. His banker, Harry White, and White's intimidating boss, Bob Wallace, they were constantly hounding him about the lack of equity. And this is the core insight for you, the listener: the paradox of growth as a liability.
Okay, explain that. Why is a 100% growth rate dangerous to a commercial banker?
Because growth eats cash. If Blue Ribbon sells 5,000 shoes, Knight has to pay Onitsuka for those shoes before he collects the cash from his customers. So if sales double every year, the amount of liquid capital he needs to cover those orders also doubles.
And since BRS had basically no equity, no cash reserves, no assets, the bank saw this exponential growth as a guarantee of bankruptcy.
They literally told him a 100% growth rate was dangerous. Knight saw it as bureaucratic nonsense. He said you might as well tell a runner in a race that he's running too fast.
He's playing this continuous game of chicken with them.
Totally. He'd place a mega order with Onitsuka, then show up at the bank looking angelic, and basically force them to issue a letter of credit, because they'd rather fund him than deal with the international legal mess of a failed transaction.
All while Johnson's hustle is paying off astronomically, he hits a sales target Knight thought was completely impossible. 3,250 pairs by June 1966.
And that earned him the right to open the first BRS retail store, 307 Pico Boulevard in Santa Monica.
Finally starting to make good on the lie, Knight told Onitsuka.
And Johnson transforms that space into a true sanctuary for runners. He fills it with yard sale chairs, books, photos, these cool illuminated shoe displays. It became a hub for bottom-up innovation.
Which is maybe the most surprising part of Johnson's story. He had no design training, but a customer complains about running the Boston Marathon in Tigers without enough cushioning.
And Johnson just acts locally. He hires a cobbler to graft rubber soles from a pair of shower shoes into some Tiger flats.
And with that simple backyard fix, he accidentally invents the space-age full-length midsole cushioning that's now standard in training shoes everywhere.
It's just incredible. The innovation process was that haphazard.
So fast forward to 1967, Knight has to deal with the biggest consequence of his lie. He has to send Johnson east to run that non-existent office.
In Wellesley, Massachusetts, a suburb of Boston, where most of their mail orders were coming from.
And Johnson was devastated.
He grieved the loss of California running. He even grieved the time he'd lose with his pet octopus, Stretch, who he fed live crabs, but he reluctantly agreed.
But before he left, he staged a mutiny.
He sends Knight a formal letter demanding a full partnership and a raise to $600 a month, plus a third of the profits.
So Knight flies to California to meet with Johnson and his aggressive father, who's acting as his negotiator.
A brutal showdown. Knight, the guy who hates confrontation, had to be decisive. He conceded Johnson's incredible work. But then he just dropped the hammer.
What did he say?
The truth of the matter is we have $40,000 in sales and more than that in debt. So there's simply nothing to divvy up here, fellas. We're fighting over slices of a pie that doesn't exist.
That just perfectly sums up the financial reality of BRS.
And Johnson, faced with that undeniable truth, he backed down. He chose the mission over the partnership, settled for a $50 raise. He was just addicted to the work.
And Knight keeps expanding the team, focusing on these resilient, mission-driven people.
Like Bob Woodall. Bowerman recommended him, a former standout long jumper who was paralyzed after a fraternity flood accident.
And Knight hired him to open the second retail store in Eugene. He was so impressed by Woodall's steeliness, he wanted BRS to embody that spirit.
And the day he hired BRS's full-time employee number 4, Knight had to ask Woodall to float him money for lunch. That's how broke they were.
Meanwhile, Bowerman, the technical innovator, is relentless after Adidas threatens to sue over their proposed name, Aztec.
Bowerman asked the team, who was that guy who kicked the shit out of the Aztecs?
The answer, of course, was Cortez.
And so the iconic Cortez shoe was born. It just perfectly shows Knight's growing contempt for the big German competitor. Every innovation felt like a punch thrown at Adidas.
And Bowerman wasn't just working on shoes either.
No, his obsession with performance led to some bizarre side projects. He was trying to invent Gatorade, a vile goo of bananas, lemonade, tea, and honey.
He was also trying to invent synthetic running surfaces by mixing shredded tires in a cement mixer.
Making himself violently sick from the fumes and injuring his runners. He was a force of constant, often dangerous experimentation.
And then there was the ultimate source of internal conflict, Bowerman's book, Jogging, published in 1967.
It became a runaway bestseller, 1 million copies. It basically made running almost cool. This should have been a huge win for BRS.
But Knight was horrified when he read the equipment section.
Exactly. Because Bowerman, the technical genius, undermines their entire value proposition. He writes that while the right shoes are important, almost any old shoe would work.
He recommends the shoes you wear for gardening.
And Knight is in despair. If Bowerman truly believed that, why were they jackassing around selling tigers and risking ruin? It created this huge conflict between the engineer and the desperate marketer.
By the end of '67, BRS revenue hits $84,000, which paradoxically only makes their debt problem worse.
So they have to move out of Knight's apartment. Their new headquarters is a room rented for $50 a month next to a tavern called the Pink Bucket. The jukebox would kick in at 4 p.m. every day.
Woodall is managing this chaotic office using an old javelin to prop open the windows. Knight builds a warped plywood wall to split the retail space from the warehouse.
It's just chaos, dust, and perpetual financial worry. He tells this story about a kid trying on shoes for an hour and then saying none were quite right. And he and Woodall are just sitting there amid mounds of boxes, wondering if this is really how you build a shoe company. But the foundations have been laid.
So let's synthesize these critical early years for you. What we've seen is this successful but incredibly chaotic transition from a purely theoretical academic idea
The Stanford paper.
to the brutal, operational, and often dishonest execution required to launch Blue Ribbon Sports.
And that execution relied entirely on human capital and relationships, not on financial strength.
Yeah.
You had Bowerman providing the technical expertise, the intellectual authority, and the initial capital from his White's Christmas Fund.
And then Johnson providing the tireless manic energy needed to actually find the customer base. Without Johnson poaching in Marlboro territory, BRS wouldn't have been strong enough to secure those national distribution rights.
And those negotiations with Onitsuka were everything. They happened not because Knight was rich or respected, but because he was persistent and willing to risk it all on these audacious claims.
First, the $1 billion market size, and second, that outright desperate lie about having East Coast offices. The chronic undercapitalization just meant every move was a massive, terrifying gamble that risked jail or immediate ruin.
And the great paradox of this whole period, as he learned from his banker Bob Wallace, was that growth, the very thing every company wants, was treated as a liability, not an asset.
Because of the pressure it put on liquid capital and equity?
Right. Commercial banks see rapid growth in an undercapitalized company like a disease. But BRS survived, not on what was on the balance sheet, but on two things that are totally intangible. Belief, which Knight said was irresistible to his customers, and sheer grit, which you see in the whole team, especially Johnson and Woodall.
Thinking about this constant financial tightrope and Knight's internal chant, fail fast, it forces a final provocative thought, doesn't it? Considering the sheer depth of the debt, the operational chaos, the constant threat of being cut off, how crucial was that specific proactive willingness to fail quickly, to learn and pivot, to transform this crazy idea into something real?
I mean, what would you define as the necessary risk tolerance to pursue a passion project that keeps you perpetually broke? You're staring down a vengeful banker and a Marlboro man. You're relying on the sales genius of a guy who writes you 8-page poems and names his pet octopus Stretch.
Right.
It takes a unique kind of insanity to survive those first 5 years and build a foundation where every single employee believes, against all financial evidence, that they're creating something meaningful.
And that profound, desperate belief born out of necessity and fear is where we will leave our deep dive for today. Thank you for listening.